You know, we can be the sheep in relationship to a goat, the lie of separation. And the other one is you don't believe I'm good. Sin is to be destroyed. People are to be healed. Eve was completely and thoroughly deceived into it. Adam chose. Nobody here is trying to do anything. This is not a ministry. This is not a mission. This is an expression. It's an expression of the life that they naturally live in.
Welcome to the Impact Nations podcast. Steve Stewart's on vacation this week, so we've got special guest Paul Young. My name is Tim. I am your host, and this is episode 910, Words Matter. Welcome back to the Impact Nations podcast. Again, we are doing something a little different this season. Normally, actually, I've been sitting here chatting with Dad at my desk here, and he teaches some, and I keep on interrupting him like a pest. But today, I found somebody else to interrupt, so I'm very excited to welcome to the podcast. Welcome back to the podcast, Paul Young. He's an acclaimed author and theologian, and a fellow Canadian, so holds a very special place in my heart. Welcome back, Paul.
Thank you, Tim. Acclaimed, whatever that
whatever that means.
Well, it could be my kids. Hey, Dad,
Indeed. You and I were talking before we got rolling that speaking of your kids, you and your son are actually doing a podcast just like Dad and I are doing. And I don't normally start with a plug, but why don't we talk about that just real quick? How can people find that? What's it all about?
You can find it paulyoungpodcast.com. And it's sort of the unpodcast because, again, we don't know what we're doing. So it's 15-ish minutes twice a week on anything that happens to come up. So if I'm working on something or reading something or thinking about something or somebody sent me an email, it's got no theme, no sponsors. It's just what it is.
I love it. That sounds awesome. I'm going to subscribe. We're here today, ostensibly, to talk about a parable from Matthew 25. What do you call this parable? When you say you're reading a parable or whatever about this passage, what do you label it?
Sheep and goats.
Sheep and goats. Yeah, I would say so too. New Living Translation. I've just got it in front of me. They just totally missed the obvious and called it the final judgment instead. So we can talk about why they might have done that. But I don't know. Normally it's just kind of a conversation. So maybe I'll pass it to you real quick to begin with, just in terms of maybe you want to set this up in terms of some context. Why did Matthew place this in this particular spot in his book? What was Jesus doing as we pick up? Because we're jumping in at verse 31 of Matthew 25. So we're well into a longer passage here. You want to just set the stage for us?
I think Jesus put it in there to bother 21st century evangelicals. That's what I think. Because people read it, but they don't really, especially if you put final judgment on there, then you already have got it all figured out. So,
right. Yeah.
And, I have no idea. I haven't been thinking about context in terms of Matthew and why there. So you have any ideas?
Well, it seems like it's the third of three parables in here. He's got the 10 bridesmaids, which is all about, whether or not they had oil and were ready for the bridegroom. We've got the three servants with their talents and how well or not well they invested those. And then he moves into this one. And so I've often wondered, what does this one have to do with those other two? And I mean, obviously, there's certainly a theme of preparedness for when the king
and about
returns.
Investing your life. What have you done in terms of your life? Because, to make this the final judgment, there's got nothing to do with asking Jesus into your life. There's got nothing to do with the sinner's prayer. It's got nothing to do with any of the things that we think will get you in versus out.
Yeah.
And so it has to do with how you've treated other human beings, and so I think it has a lot to do with the other two parables as you talk about that. So yeah,
that in versus out, that dualism, because that is very I don't know if it's post enlightenment or what, but it's certainly very much 21st century evangelicalism in terms of, have you prayed the prayer? Are you going to heaven? One of the we'll call it evangelism tactics that kind of drives me nuts is that question, do you know where you're going when you die? Right. Which immediately starts from a place of fear, like, oh no, I don't know. I don't have certainty and all those things. Right. And yet I don't think that's what Jesus is getting at here. And if he was, and maybe there's some of that here, but if he was, the criteria is very, very different from what we might understand to be the beginning of your Christian journey, which is praying this prayer of surrender, inviting Jesus into your heart.
Yeah, that prayer is only a couple hundred years old, so I don't know what happened to people before that. And came out of the revivalist movement, right? So it's really 1800s, 19th century, 20th century, 21st century evangelicals. And I'm grateful that Jesus wasn't an evangelical. And so he comes from a different paradigm completely. And so it's got nothing to do with any of that. And if it's the final judgment, it's really about how we've related to those who are peripheral, those who are outcasts, those who are not considered, actually, they're not really considered the in people very often, not in the West anyway.
Yeah.
You have to forgive me. I lose my voice when I write, and I'm up writing. And it's the oddest thing.
Is it just because disuse, like you're not using it, so it goes dormant?
No, it has to do, I think, with the power of words, and I'm not speaking at all. I'm taking the energy with words and putting them on paper or on a computer, and it wastes my voice. It takes my voice. And so it's my voice in a different form. It's overusing it maybe. But it's happened ever since the shack.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of, I kind of like it actually. And Kim likes it because she can tell how hard I've been working.
She knows you're actually getting something done up there.
Yeah, exactly. So.
And I should say to our listeners, because you're referencing a conversation we had just before we hit the cameras rolling, but maybe just tell folks where you're at and what you're up to right now.
Yeah, so I live in the Northwest, and so I had friends who gave me a little place to work, and I'm up near Mount Hood, and the project is the sequel for the shack. So I'm up here for like 4.5 days. And I do that every once in a while just to get away and actually completely focus on something. So that's what I've been working on. Sequel for the shack, which I
Awesome.
never thought of. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, and I let's revisit that later in our conversation, because I would love to know a little bit about just kind of how the genesis of this sequel and things like that. It occurs to me that Dad and I at times, I've been giving him grief because there's a couple times when he jumped into teaching and I didn't actually read the parable. So with your permission, I'm just going to read these verses out of Matthew 25. I'm going to read it. Dad's been doing stuff out of the New Revised Standard Version. The version that I personally is kind of my daily driver right now is N.T. Wright's New Testament for Everyone, I just love that. So if you're cool with it, I'm going to read this. And I can say that Tom Wright, he chose the very obvious, the sheep and the goats for his heading of this passage. So I'm already encouraged. So it says this. This is starting Matthew 25, verse 31 and forward. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, Jesus went on, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be assembled in front of him, and he will separate them from another. Like a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats, he will stand the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come here, you people whom my Father has blessed. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Why? Because I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you made me welcome. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Master, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you a drink? When did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and come to see you?" Then the king will answer them, I'm telling you the truth. When you did it to one of the least significant of my brothers and sisters here, you did it to me. Then he will say to those on his left hand, get away from me. You're accursed. Go to the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Why? Because I was hungry and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger and you didn't welcome me. I was naked and you didn't clothe me. I was sick and in prison and you didn't look after me. Then they too will answer, Master, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and didn't do anything for you? Then he will answer them, I'm telling you the truth. When you didn't do it for one of the least significant of my brothers and sisters here, you didn't do it for me. And they will go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous will go into everlasting life.
Wow. What strikes you right off?
Well, first off, amazing to me the word I'll use, it's not the best one, is the naivete of both the sheep and the goats. Like, when did this happen? Like, what are you talking about? When did we ever see you? Like, they're both operating in ignorance or enlightenment in the way of the kingdom without even really noticing that they're doing it, I suppose. Both are coming naturally to them. And so they're kind of blindsided by the entire proposition here.
Yeah. When you say both are coming naturally to them, I think that's really accurate and really important. So nobody here is trying to do anything. This is not a ministry. This is not a mission. This is an expression. It's an expression of the life that they naturally live in.
Yeah.
And so there's a juxtaposition between the nations versus these individual ones. And I think that's important too, because the judgment is against the nations, which is odd. And the reaching out is the daily persons who are right in front of you. And this community of people naturally reaches out, so naturally that they don't see it as doing anything special. They see it just as a natural expression. The other thing that strikes me is about perception of God regarding union. This is, I am in union with these people. Mm-hmm. And so don't you see that I am in them and they are in me? So when you care for someone, yes, you are caring for them, but you're also caring for me. And that's the union piece that so many of us who believe in separation don't get. There's no separation here.
Yeah.
And so to care for someone who is struggling or having a problem or is poor or needs to be fed, because of Christ's union with them, you are caring for them. And I also don't think that those who are struggling are then those who God only is dwelling in. It's anybody. And anybody.
We fall into that binary thing, right? Oh, well, if Christ is in them, but he's not in these people over here. He
Right.
uses the words twice here, the least significant of my brothers and sisters, sort of a thing. But he doesn't really qualify what he means by brothers and sisters. I think that's one of the things that I've often, he labels obviously the hungry, the poor, things like that in here. But who are these brothers and sisters that he's actually referencing? It can't be those who have just prayed the prayer and thus they are in him and he is in them. Yeah. But there's something far more holistic there, is there not?
Oh, very much so. This is talking about any single human being on the planet. Yeah. And if you go to Acts 17, Paul makes the point, we are all God's children.
Yeah.
And because you're God's children, then stop worshiping things that you've made with your hands. So because we're all God's children, we're all brothers and sisters. And that's the juxtaposition between identifying yourself within a group of people as opposed to relating to people face to face and realizing their significance. Yeah. So I think it's incredibly important that we begin to understand this is hard for my people, modern evangelical holiness fundamentalists, to begin to trust that every single human being you ever meet is an indwelling holy place for the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so when you care for anybody, it's not like, oh, the brothers and sisters are only the Christians who have prayed the prayer or whatever, did the baptism, whatever. And it's like, no, God's no respecter of persons.
Yeah.
God's a lover of persons. And so when you care for whoever is right there in front of them and respond to their need, you are caring for Christ, who is filling up the sufferings, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the first thing. Another little piece of this is that I begin to understand that I am sometimes a sheep and sometimes a goat. Sometimes I respond to the one that is in front of me, and sometimes I don't. And when I don't, I am now attaching myself to an imagination of a nation that is not acting out of the reality of that union. So that's important. The other thing is to start talking about words and what words are in this passage. A couple things are really, really significant. One is the Greeks nor the Hebrews really had a concept of never-ending time. They didn't. And so we do in terms of ideological imagination, infinity, but they didn't. Their word for time was aionios or ioni or ion, and that has a limited. It is the best translation instead of eternal, because we automatically place infinity on the word eternal. But aionios, and they can be plural. So, I mean, that's a little bit difficult for the modern mind because you can't really have two eternities.
Right.
But the translation I like is age enduring, or the time it takes to accomplish a purpose. So whatever that is, it could be almost instant, and it could be 100 years, and it could be 1,000 years, whatever time it takes to accomplish a purpose. And then the question is, so what's the purpose? And then you get into the terms that are used for judgment, and we mix them all up in the English, but the Greek doesn't. They have very, very carefully chosen words to accomplish whatever the purpose is in a given situation. And there are fundamentally three families of these words that we translate judgment or punishment. Two of them are restorative, and one of them is retributive or vengeful. The two that are restorative are crisis, the crisis family, which the Latinized version of that gets to then anglicized is our word crisis, or what's another good word for now you are not in trouble, but you are in conflict. You are entering a conflict. So when it says it is pointed for a person once to die, and after that, the crisis, you are entering into a conflict. And the conflict is between everything that is not of love's kind in you and Jesus, who is only of love's kind, who is out to destroy everything that is not of love's kind in you.
Out to destroy everything that is not of love's kind in you. And I love that, because I think many fundamentalists would say he's out to destroy everyone who is not reflecting God's glory or hasn't prayed the prayer, is really what they're saying.
Sure.
But I don't think that that's what. And that's where we get back to that retributive thing. One of the things that Dad has said earlier in this series that really resonated with me, because we were having a laugh in the first several episodes of season 9 as Dad was reading these parables, we kept on coming up against this phrase, weeping and gnashing of teeth. And, the mind is going to interpret that in different ways, I suppose. But in our modern context, usually, again, we're coming back to this place of eternal punishment, eternal conscious torment. And Dad really turned it on his head and said, no, it's that process of burning away anything that isn't of love's kind and coming face to face with the reality of the pain that we have caused, and going through a process of regret. And that, like, who wouldn't, when really confronted with the pain that they've caused, begin weeping and gnashing their teeth and like having regret, like, oh, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I caused that pain amongst these other individuals. And that has been really, really helpful for me every time I bump into that phrase now.
I have a bunch of friends on death row. They've become my friends over the last 5, 6 years. And some of them are pedophiles. And there is that verse that if you've done any harm to one of these children, better than a millstone were hung around your neck and you were tossed into the ocean. These guys understand that, and they all believe that. They all believe that it would have been better if a millstone were hung around their neck, as opposed to the damage that they did and the harm that they perpetrated. And
Wow.
so the same kind of thing, the weeping and gnashing of teeth, it can happen in kind of in two different directions. When they were stoning Stephen, they hated so much what he said that they were grinding their teeth at him.
Yeah.
So there's that too. And so when you are exposed to love's kind, all of your vitriol, all of the false personas that you have adapted, all of your nation state stuff, like in the Matthew 25 passage, is going to come and be exposed. And the greatest exposure is how you have chosen to live your life, and how you have extended the love that is in you. This is fruit. This is not something you can produce apart from the vine, right? This is produced by the life that is in the vine. And so you're a branch. You are the branch that holds the fruit. And Jesus is saying, all right, if there is a sense of judgment in this passage, it is reflective of how you've lived your life. Another little section that I've come to really love. I used to be terrified by it because I was modern evangelical, so I was terrified by almost everything. And so it's and on that day, many will come and they will say, "We did miracles in your name. We cast out demons in your name. We did all these churchy things." And some of them are very evangelical churchy things. Some of them are charismatic Pentecostal kinds of churchy things. And he says, and I will say to them, "Depart from me, because I never knew you," into everlasting judgment. And again, it's Ionios. And again, it's not Krino. I don't think it's Krino, but it doesn't matter. It's the Kalesis family, which is absolutely clear that it's restorative in nature. But what is Jesus saying there? I don't know you because you've created an identity, a persona around your performance. And I will not build a relationship with something that does not exist.
Wow.
So let's have that eternally destroyed so that you and I can actually get to know each other as real persons.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I love that. I love
That's
that.
amazing. Can you? I want to zero in a little bit more on this restorative justice thing, because you mentioned this one is I don't know how to say it. I've got it in front of me here. Kalesis. Is that right?
Let me read you a little piece about Kalesis.
Yeah.
And then I'll tell you the Timoria family, which is the vengeful family. And in fact, it's in this little section. The word for punishment is kalesis. This word was originally a gardening word, and its original meaning was pruning, like pruning trees. In Greek, there are two big words for punishment, timoria and kalesis, and there is a great definite distinction between them. Aristotle defines the difference. Kalesis is for the sake of the one who suffers it. Timoria is for the sake of the one who inflicts it. Plato says that no one punishes kalesi, a wrongdoer, simply because he's done wrong. That would be to take unreasonable vengeance, timoria. So we punish a kalesi, a wrongdoer, in order that he may not do the harm again. Clement of Alexandria defines kalesis as pure discipline and timoria as the return of evil for evil. Alice Gellius says that kalesis is given that a man may be corrected. Timoria is given that dignity and authority may be vindicated. The difference is quite clear in the Greek, and it is always observed. Timoria is retributive, or timorea is retributive punishment. Kalesis is remedial discipline. Kalesis is always given to amend and to cure. Always. Timoria is never used of God. Not one
I
time,
was going to ask you, yeah.
not once. And in this 25 passage, it is kalesis. So it is go to age-enduring, restorative process. And this goes back to our view of God as a judge in a courtroom, which is Temoria, or our view, like the early church, of God in a hospital, because he's
Yeah.
the physician, which is kalesis.
Yes. And so I've heard Dad teach, and I am researching it before I make frequent use of it. But this is a helpful conversation. He very regularly says sin is not something to be punished, but something to be healed. And so it sounds to me like this.
I would say it a little different. I
Yeah.
would say sin is to be destroyed. People are to be healed.
Yeah.
And a lot of the destruction of that sin is to turn your orientation back to your origin, the truth of who you are.
Yeah.
Because the activity of behavior is only a reflection of what you believe to be true about yourself, right? And if you believe that you are a piece of garbage, or Martin Luther's snow-covered dung,
Yep.
then you will act like it. As a person thinks in their heart, so will they be. So the ways of if you see somebody who is constantly acting in a way that is not truthful, they are lying. That person has no clue about who they are.
Yeah.
Right? The activity, it's not behavioral. It's like the word sin itself, hamartia, which is a denial of origin. It's not about behavior. It's about the destruction of the lies that you believe falsely about the truth of who you are. That's the origin of the activity. And we make it all about the behavior. Right? We say you are the behavior. So it's not sin that can be healed. It's sin that must be destroyed. And that releases
so that
us,
the sinner can be healed.
so that the sinner is healed.
Yeah.
And what you see in this passage is Jesus is saying, when you act this way, you know who you are. And what you're doing is natural to the truth of who you are. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So coming back to something you said earlier, in that you said, sometimes I can be a sheep and sometimes I can be a goat, depending on my response in a particular. Yeah, the way you are operating in any one given moment, and so that I think that really plays right back into that place of like the things that are going to be burned away that we will be confronted by in this time of judgment, this what would be called eternal period here, but this time, as long as it takes to purify us, is
starting now. I don't know about you, but it started now for me.
Yeah, let's get to that. But it's, again, we tend to separate this like good people and bad people. But we're all in the turmoil of that, and there are periods of our life where we may be operating much more as a goat than a sheep, so to speak. But we're all going to answer for all of this behavior, are we not? Like there are, and let's not forget that there will be moments of celebration where, hey, way to go, sheepy, yeah, you done good. And then, but let's talk about this time that you were a super big goat. And it's much more messy than, like, I understand what he's doing in terms of the metaphor here, but the separation actually really is coming down to that separation within ourselves, separating from us, burning away, pruning those things that are goat-like, that don't belong. Right.
And I don't believe that death then ushers in perfection in terms of who we are. It ushers in crisis. There's appointed, and after that, the crisis. You die, and then you're into a confrontation with love, with Jesus. And that becomes the crisis that validates the human It's human respect. It's respect for the human who has personal agency. And that means everything you do now actually matters. There has to be a age-enduring time in which I then am completely reconciled to those that I have harmed. I know people. I can tell you who they are right now that I'm not reconciled to yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so is my hope death? Is death then my hope to get away from the work that is required to be reconciled, to ask for forgiveness, and and part of it is other people don't want to be reconciled. And so what does that mean? You wait. You wait. Because reconciliation is way more difficult than forgiveness. Forgiveness is easy. If you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, you can forgive someone.
Yeah.
And it's for your own sake. But the journey of reconciliation God was in Christ and reconciled the world to himself. Now be reconciled, right? Yeah. So there's a work in the other direction. So everything that we participate in now matters, and everything that is not of love's kind is yet to be completely destroyed. And it has to be.
I love this. I was recently, I'm trying to find a polite verb. I was listening to some teaching from a Reformed theologian who basically stated explicitly the problem with overemphasizing God's love as an attribute, and I would contend that actually love is his very nature. It's the core of his being, and all of his attributes must flow from that. But systematic theology would list love as one of his attributes, and the claim was the danger of overemphasizing this love leads to universalism, because it says, well, everybody's just going to get in the end, which I don't know why everybody's so afraid of that anyway. But mostly their point was it doesn't actually encourage. It's effectively really underneath. I think what he was saying was it's a terrible behavioral modification tool. You can't love somebody into properly behaving, and I just think that's bonkers. But what you're saying is, no, when we are confronted with love itself in the person of Jesus, there is conflict, like that leads to a refining, and that should motivate and even fuel the way we live our life right now, rather than this what many would call cheap grace of like, hey, I'm in the end anyway. So, which by the way, I think that actually comes personally. I think that's far more likely if you get into this dualism of, well, hey, I prayed the prayer, I got my ticket in, I'm good to go. It's like this assumption that there won't be a judgment if you prayed that prayer, if you walked forward during that gospel meeting or whatever, then now you don't need to face this judgment. Whereas I think what you're saying is, no, every single creature, every single person is going to face this moment, and it's going to take as long as it needs to take to burn away that which is not of love's kind.
Yeah. We buried my dad a little over 2 years ago, and it was a very small family gathering. And the funeral director, we had started talking to him, my sister and I, and we didn't hide the harm. We didn't hide the harm. Mm-hmm. And he then started opening up about his own life. But when we laid the casket into the ground, when we buried him, we talked about the good, the bad, and the ugly right there. And it made him uncomfortable to the point where he had to give his own 2 cents. And it was, isn't it great to know that when you died, none of this will have mattered? And I said, as gently and as loving as I can say this, I absolutely disagree with you. Because to say that means that nothing during this time has mattered. And then the accusation against God is, why did you stand around and watch us do all this damage when it doesn't even matter? And it matters. So that's God's respect for us, that God doesn't step in and make our decisions for us, but God is going to deal with how that's interwoven and become the prison we call home. And God is going to has already climbed into that prison and is working so that we will at one point walk out and into
Yeah.
the freedom that is ours. But man, there is judgment, but it's kalesis and it's krino. It is not retributive. It is not vengeful. And, you look at the American justice system and it's a vengeance system. It's Timoria all over. And it's not. With the guys on death row, there is no sense that any transformation can occur. And their point of view is, the system is vengeance. But like my friend Terry said on death row, he says, if they kill this body, interesting note that on the death certificate, when they execute someone, cause of death is homicide. Homicide is the cause of death. Yeah. So right
That's
on the death
ironic.
certificate. But he says, if they execute this body, they will not be killing the man who committed the crimes because he's been dead a long time.
Wow. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. And so, what we are talking about in terms of Matthew 25 is not groups of people who are just separated. It is going after the very core of what it means to be truly human and truly alive.
Yeah.
And it is out to destroy anything in us that would not have reached out naturally because of our union with God, because of our ease of response to the presence of Jesus who is in the other. What kind of difference would it make if we began to see every single person, regardless of how dastardly they are acting, if we began to realize that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit indwelled them, or else they could not exist, right? And therefore, I am not only loving that human being, but I'm loving the union that they have with Jesus. And that is why you would go like, when did I do this? When did I act love? Right? And it's like every time that you showed and expressed the kindness, the extension of the hand of Jesus, you looked through the eyes of Jesus, because you cannot dissolve this union. We have so much language about separation that is not true. But it is the language we're used to. Yeah, in our worship, calling God down. Would you please come? Would you, all of this kind of garbage. And Jesus is like, or the apostles are like, look, don't you realize that you are the holy of holies of God? You are the temple of the living God. You are in union with the God who is Jesus, who is the Holy Spirit, who is the Father. And it's like,
where did this separation language come from? How did we get here?
The first not good. It is not good that Adam be in a separation. Job, don't be like Adam who hid the iniquity in his heart. Right? That's where it starts. Through one man, sin entered the world. It wasn't at the fruit part. It was at the not good part. Everything in the fruit part is just an expression of what has already been turned away from. You turn away from light, you cast your own shadow. Then you interpret everything through that shadow. And then everything, there is now separation between Adam and Eve. There is separation between Adam and creation. There's it just goes on. And then every religion is about separation and trying to get God to cross it. Doing the right thing, having the right sacrifice, killing children, killing the enemies in the name of God. It's all separation. Baxter Kruger was up in the mountains, and he's Presbyterian background, so he doesn't have visions. He has visuals. And he saw this big visual where across the Colorado mountains, he saw a huge beaver dam, huge, and it was holding back the water of life. It was trickling in through the stuff here and there. And at the bottom were these two massive logs, as big as a skyscraper. And he says to the Lord, what are those two logs? What's the biggest one and what's the other one? And the biggest was the lie of separation. And the other one is you don't believe I'm good.
Wow.
Those were the two biggest.
Yeah.
And so this lie of separation, it dominates us. And it's what creates all the fear in us. And there is no love. I mean, there is no fear in love. First John, there is no fear in love. And so, I've been saying lately to my friends, I believe love is the most violent force on the planet because it tears into everything that we consider holy and protective and all of these things, and it destroys it. It's what creates the exposure. It's love that exposes, right? And we think it's weak. And I hear that all the time. Like, oh, you just think that love and what they mean is something weak. God is love. Since when has God been weak? Since when has the Lion of the tribe of Judah been weak? But how we see him in our reality is a freshly slain little lamb. And so Matthew 25 is about us being freshly slain little lambs, laying our lives down for the weak and the heart,
Yeah.
Those who have experienced harm, the marginalized.
Yeah. And coming back to the separation theme for a moment, because I think if you come from the worldview of we're all separated from God and we're trying to find a way to build that bridge, you get to this passage and you go, well, here it is right here. He's separating the sheep and the goats. But if we come back to actually, he's just separating whatever isn't of love's kind. He's separating from ourselves that which he can't relate to and keeps us from relating to him.
Yeah.
That's the separation. It's not separation of one group of people from God, but rather separation within all of us of that which just can't exist if we're going to relate to him purely.
It's a parable. It's a metaphor. Any sense of separation is self-centered. Every sense of separation must be self-centered because now I've got to do something.
And what's interesting is God's the one right from the very beginning. You bring it right back to Genesis 3, right? Like Adam may feel sad, and actually Adam and Eve intentionally in the story separate themselves from God. No. And what's God's very first response is to go look in the bushes and say, "What are you doing hiding from me? Like where did you go?" He's pursuing them.
Yeah, but Eve was completely and thoroughly deceived into it. Adam chose, and Adam has an accusation against God. The woman you gave me. This is your fault. She is deceived. She's telling the truth as she knows it, and she got that information from Adam. There's already been a tearing and her information's wrong. And she becomes the first believer. It's Adam that is removed from the garden, not her. And but she's warned, if you turn to him, he'll rule over you. But you read it 3 times, it says that he is, escorted out of the garden to return back to the ground that he was drawn out from to work that ground 3 times. Very clear. And so she becomes your first believer. She's the one that is given the promise that would crush the accusation of God's goodness against God's goodness. And so separation, Adam's completely self-centered in that. And now she's given the promise and she can turn to that promise that will accomplish exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
The destruction of all that is not of love's kind.
Yeah.
Because we're made in the likeness of God.
Yeah. And this is such a much more beautiful gospel than the typical God's really pissed off at you, the snow-covered dung sort of a thing, right? And he had to punish sin, and he had to punish sinners. But Jesus took that punishment for you. I was saying to a friend recently, I said, one of the reasons that I can't preach that gospel, I can't live that gospel is what we do here at Impact Nations. I said, we reach people who have been absolutely robbed of their dignity and frankly of their humanity as an image bearer. They have been robbed by those who have violated them, right? And for those who maybe are new to Impact Nations, Paul, but we're in developing nations, rescuing people from very dangerous situations: human trafficking, slavery, teen pregnancy, abuse, homelessness, forced prostitution, all of these things. If I imagine, just imagine going to a young woman who's been absolutely brutally violated and leading with a gospel that says, yeah, God sees that wickedness. That, by the way, like, your family just kicked you out of the home because you're a pregnant teenager and they said you're wicked, which the irony of that is appalling because usually that was at the hands of one of those relatives. But anyway, they kick you out and say you're wicked. If I come right alongside and agree with those accusations, and by the way, the Satan is the accuser. So now I'm just coming in line with the accuser and saying, yes, God agrees. Actually, you are wicked. The conversation's over. Like, in no way have I brought light into darkness in this way. If I come alongside instead and say, you were made in the image of God, you have inherent dignity and worth, and God is about restoring that. And would you like to step into relationship with him where he can begin to bring restoration? And we're going to work with him in partnership with the God of the universe who created you to begin to bring restoration back to the way things were created in the first place. I don't know. That's a much more beautiful approach, in my opinion. And frankly, it's the only one I could ever possibly fathom. I just can't imagine going with any other message.
Yeah. You get the sense that you have to do something to be worthy of affection, to be worthy of being loved.
Yeah.
What kind of craziness is that?
Yeah.
And it makes God at least two-faced.
Yeah, exactly. Man, this has been a lot of fun. I'm looking at the time, and I want to make sure we have enough time to talk a little bit about what you're working on right now too. But just before we get into a plug for Paul's work, I'll give a plug for mine. For Impact Nations, we love going into all the earth and demonstrating this beautiful gospel. And we do it in a lot of different ways. But I would encourage you this season, we're always excited because we've just launched the Impact Nations gift catalog, which is really, it's just page after page after page of incredible stories of restoration, stories of people who were in incredible danger, and by God's grace, our partners were given an opportunity to bring rescue and restoration. And so there's just these narratives of people who came out of terrible circumstances and are now looking at a future full of hope and dignity and surprise and delight and discovering what God made them to be. And I would encourage you, grab the catalog. You can go to impactnations.com/catalog and you can see all of the stories there. We've got videos on a number of these stories as well. And just be encouraged, because the gospel is bringing absolute transformation to communities, to individuals, to families. And you get to be a part of that. So once you've read some of those stories, I hope it will inspire you to get involved and just give a gift. You can buy a computer for somebody who last year was just stuck in gang life and violence and just terrible life in the slums, and now they've got a whole new future before them. And if you can buy them a computer, they're going to have their own business and be able to raise their children in safety and all sorts of stuff. You could buy a sewing machine, you could buy a water filter, help a family get proper help and stuff. So anyway, lots of ways to participate, but just head to impactnations.com/catalog. But now, Paul, I'm very interested to hear that you are right now working on a sequel to your work, The Shack. I'm interested to know, what's that?
I never thought I would do that.
Yeah, it's been a number of years. When was that book published?
2007.
Wow, it's been a hot minute. Why now?
Partly because life is unpredictable. And, when I went into death row and started building a relationship with these guys, that's what started a thought with regard to the possibility, because I've got a serial killer, and in terms of The Shack. So what if it's been some time? And there's a difference between forgiving an idea of someone and actually doing it face to face. What if there's a way to end up in a face-to-face situation. And Mackenzie's got to deal with a bunch of stuff. What if the reality is that you can have a great experience with God, but it doesn't fix everything, right? Those kinds of questions.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm working on. And I love how it's flowing. It's very different because it involves a whole lot of relationships. The Shack was really about an individual's person's journey, right? Much more so. Crossroads was more relational, but the sequel is much more relational.
Yeah.
And so it's a different animal. And I like it. I like how it's flowing. I do.
Is it fun revisiting some of those characters again after all these years?
I've had to go back and do some research and reread sections of the Shack because I'm like, all right, were they married, or how did that work? Or did he have more than one child, or, whatever.
Yeah.
And so did he really have a dog? I mean, little things like that where you have to kind of reconnect the things. But the guys on death row have really helped me form some of the storyline. So
yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And I think I had this thought while you were talking about the incredible things that y'all are doing. And the brother, probably a brother, who wrote this little piece about the weakness of love or the danger of love, he's a marginalized person. He's one in whom the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit dwell. He's the one that we can extend the love because we understand it's much more freer than he does at this point.
Yeah.
We can be the sheep in relationship to a goat.
That's beautiful. Can we talk about that for a sec? Because this is something that, and you and I talked, I don't know, last year, I think, when we were talking about your book, The Lies We Believe About God. And one of the things I said then and hold to now is you are incredibly gifted at just operating in grace, because you've had a lot of people over the years who get pretty grumpy with you because you just are revealing this beautiful gospel. And so that can really tick off some fundamentalists. And yet your ability to operate in grace is quite remarkable. Can you give I still wrestle with grumpiness when it comes to these things, that I almost feel I lost a night of sleep recently because because of this, picture of God as a sadistic, vengeful deity, and it was that comment of we have a tendency to, or universalists watch out because they will overemphasize God's love, and I lost a night of sleep because I was so worked up about it. How do you find peace, and how do you operate in grace when you are encountering those who want to hold fast to a vengeful God?
God doesn't need me to defend him. He doesn't need anything. And it's been a long time since I've felt like I need to step in on God's behalf and say a good word for him. And on the other side, I don't have anything to lose. My identity is not in the Shack. My identity is not in what I write. My identity is not in speaking. It's not in any of those things. So part of it is learning how to stay and live. I can get triggered, but most of my life only in the present tense. And that is only responding to the person who's actually in front of me. In the last 2 weeks, we had a situation like this where I was speaking and we had a venue. And then, one of the folks at the venue started listening to me and got upset. And so contacted their group of people, and it was just a rollout of that. So they pulled the venue kind of at the last moment, and people are like, "Does that bother you?" My sense is it didn't catch God by surprise, And when somebody's upset with my book, I want to listen to see if what they're saying has value. It just happened to me. I was in Switzerland and Germany, and the house theologian in this one community got very upset because of what he was reading in Lies. And turned out he was right. Turned out that the translator had translated certain words incorrectly. And I
Wow.
don't know German. And so as we talked it through, it became obvious that there was a miscommunication, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and so now we've already started a conversation seeing if we can't get those sections retranslated because they're a problem.
Yeah.
So I want to listen. But the other side of it is when the shack or something I've written causes a turmoil, I just don't jump to the conclusion that that's a bad thing. Because a lot of times the shack has two impacts. One is it validates what people have been hoping and believing in their heart of hearts quietly. And it's encouraging and it's healing. The other thing is that it's exposing. When people get really upset about something important is happening. And so I don't have any territory to lose. I don't have any position to lose. I don't have any of that because my worth, identity, security, meaning, purpose, destiny, all that kind of stuff, those things are settled for me.
Yeah.
And do I get bothered by the harm that things do, but not so much by the people who are doing them. I have a lot easier time loving people than I used to because I see Christ in them, for one thing, like the parable that we were talking about. And so I can get the people that can trigger me the most are those that I'm closest to. I'm most vulnerable to them. But my tendency is to be able to love strangers better than I can love those who are close to me. That's not right. That means that my stuff's coming to the surface, right? And I think that's important to understand. I also, what was the thought that I just had? Sheep and goats. There are a lot of people who've never said the sinner's prayer or are quote unquote followers of Jesus who are much more sheepish than a lot of the people who have. Right?
Yeah.
It is like, look at their lives, look at how they extend love and kindness, right? Who are the kind people in the world? They're the ones who would definitely say, oh, when did I do this? If Jesus goes, look at what you did for me. Look at when you did this to me. And they're like, what in the world are you talking about? Because they haven't done the quote unquote right things to get from outside in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how is that even possible? When I was growing up, we said, well, the love they even have for their children is sort of a fake love. It's not like the real.
Yeah, that's
I know.
dangerous.
Pretty icky.
Now, what would you say though to the response to that in terms of but the scripture is clear that you must confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, that the only Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Like for those who haven't prayed the prayer or are not living a life of recognizing Jesus as Lord, but are pretty sheep-like. Like there's a pretty obvious tension there in the scriptures themselves. What do you say to that?
Yeah, is the scriptures talking about your apprehension and experience of it, or is it talking about getting you from one location to another? Right. So being born from above or born again, Nicodemus situation. Is that a situation in which Nicodemus is now going to come from outside to inside? Or is it that the light that is dwelling in him is going to become more visible and his apprehension of it is going to become greater and his experience of it is going to be more expressed? And I would go with that. I would go like, no, you're not going to deal with outside in. There's no separation. We're not talking separation theology at the core of this, right? God is fully everywhere present, which means Like Jesus says, on that day, you'll finally realize I'm in the Father, you are in me, and I'm in you. So this is always an inside out thing. Do I think that praying the sinner's prayer is like, it doesn't matter? No, I think it's incredibly powerful. I just don't think that it means what we tend to think, and that is, oh, it got me from outside in. Because I have continued to have those experiences where I begin to apprehend something about the depth, the width, the height of who God is as love. And my life continues to change in those kinds of ways. So baptism was really meaningful for me. For me, saying the sinner's prayer was a way to confess something that I didn't know how to apprehend, but I saw. I didn't know what it meant, but I saw. And so it was very powerful for me, and it's powerful for a lot of people. But I don't think it gets you from outside in. I think
Yeah.
we're all in. We've all been included. We are all in Christ, and when he died, we all died. That God was in Christ and reconciled the cosmos to himself, not counting their sins against them. I mean, what do you do with that? Agape does not keep a record of wrongs. What do you do with that?
Yeah.
Because, eternal conscious torment is you have to keep a record of wrongs in order to make that courtroom punishment declaration. And
Yeah.
so something's wrong, and it's not God who is wrong. It's the way that we apprehend, see, and experience. So
Yeah.
those who are outside are living as expressions of the Christ who is in them, Jesus who is in union with them, whether they know it or not. And a lot of my life, I still don't know it or not. I'm
Yeah.
still moving toward a greater comprehension and therefore expression of this life that I am in union with. But I can't do anything to destroy that union. I'm not only not powerful enough, like the early church, if you were able to do it, you would cease to exist. You cannot even exist apart from that union. And now that changes the way I look at the cross, because since I'm in him, Romans, when he died, I died. When
Mhm.
he rose, I rose. And when he ascended, I ascended. And the entire human race is in him, because not anything that has come into being has come into being apart from him. So again, this union versus separation are absolutely critical in terms of how we then live our lives. But even not understanding that doesn't separate us.
Right.
Nothing can separate us from the love of God. Nothing. Not life, not death, not any created thing. And I'm a created thing. I cannot, nor can any created thing separate them from the love of God. Oh, but
Mm.
this is the love of God now. But that's different than being in Christ. No, it's not. It's not. And it's different from being a child of God. There are children of God, and then there are children of God. What kind of nonsense is that? Read Acts 17.
Yeah.
It's right there. You live and move, everybody. And he's talking to pagans. You live and move and have your being in him. You are all children of God. So therefore, as children of God, right? It's there. This is God who has given you life and breath and everything. And none of them even knew about a sinner's prayer, especially Paul.
So bringing it back to the sinner's prayer, because you talked about the value of that in your life, I'm interested to know, like, have you led people into a place of, I was going to say a place of decision, like that. I'm not going to say the sinner's prayer, but a sinner's prayer, a prayer of submitting to the lordship of Jesus. Or how do you? How do you lead people into that moment of decision?
I usually pray more like Paul's prayers. Let's pray that this indwelling Holy Spirit would more and more open up your inside eyes. The clarity of what God has done for you and continues to do in you would grant to you freedom and peace and grace, that your life may become an expression only of that which is of love's kind. And as all of this other crap is destroyed, that you would become fully free and fully human. That's kind of what I would say. And I would say that for all of us. But, I kind of avoid language that sounds like, oh, we got you, you know, grab evangelism, snatch and grab, or
Mm.
whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And that to me is not helpful, because in terms of that kind of evangelism, you automatically set up separation. And when you do that, you automatically have superiority and exclusion.
Much to think about, much to reflect on, much to, in all honesty, stand in awe of. And it leads me to a place of worship.
Absolutely. Me too. Me too. And you begin to have a respect for the human race that is not possible inside a separation theology, and a respect for your own creation, and a submission, and a humility. And you are surrounded constantly by gratitude. Gratitude, which, by the way, is the most powerful embracing a human being can do. And it's tested. They've tested gratitude against neuroscience, against all of these modalities. And gratitude is the most powerful.
Wow.
Most powerful healing reality in the cosmos.
I would challenge you, our listeners, our viewers, hang out with people who live in a place of gratitude, because it's catching too. When you spend time with people who just operate in that sphere of gratitude for all that God has done in their life.
We have a little jar, actually, it's a big, in our house. And through the year, we write gratitude statements about what's happening in our life. And then at Thanksgiving, we open it and read them all.
Oh, that's fun.
Isn't that
Wow.
fun?
I love that. That's so cool. Paul, when can people catch your next book? If you're writing it now, what's the process? Sometime middle of next year? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. It's up to the publisher. So my target date for the full complete manuscript is the end of January. I want a rough draft by Christmas. That's what my thought is. But life is full of interruptions. So
Indeed.
Awesome.
Well, we look forward to it. And when it comes out, we'll have you back and we'll chat about that too, if that's all right.
Sure. Love you, Tim.
Yeah, I love you too, Paul. Thank you so much for being a part of the Impact Nations family, and just sharing your wisdom and your careful approach to the scriptures is just so appreciated here. And we're just so thankful for your thoughts. Yeah, this is wonderful. If people want to follow you somewhere, are you a social media guy? What's the best way? If people have been excited by what they've heard today and they want more, where do they go?
The easiest one is paulyoungpodcast.com. Yeah, start there. I'm not a big social media guy. So.
Yeah, they can Google you. They'll find you.
Yeah, exactly.
They'll probably find all sorts of other stuff too.
Well, they will. Yeah, I've got all kinds of friends out there.
Yeah, beautifully said. Paul, thanks for being with us.
Yeah.
And folks, thank you for listening or viewing the Impact Nations podcast. Please subscribe. We're hanging out every single week. Comes out Thursdays. I don't know, Thursday morning, I think. And depending on where you are in the world, I suppose. But you can catch us on YouTube, Impact Nations. No, what is it? YouTube.com/@ImpactNations. We got a playlist for each season of the podcast. Or if you want to just catch the audio, just subscribe to the Impact Nations podcast on your favorite audio podcasts app, and you'll find us there, and you can listen on your way to work. And we will see you again next week. Thanks so much. God bless you.